Well, welcome back to the True Man Podcast. On today's episode, I'm talking with Dr. Gabe Roberts. He is the co-founder of Holographic Manipulation Therapy, which sounds really cool, and is a specialist in psychosomatic illness, including autoimmune conditions, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, digestive illness, neurological conditions, depression, and a host of other mystery conditions, which I can't wait to touch on, that have at their root cause repressed emotions. And if that wasn't enough to tease you up front, he's also written a book called As a Man Thinketh and Gains Rapport with His Subconscious Mind. Wow, there's going to be a lot to talk about on today's episode. Dr. Roberts, thanks for being on the program today. How are you?
I'm doing excellent, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me.
You bet. So I'm excited to dig into this whole idea around I can't even say it, holographic manipulation therapy. But before we do, what I'd like to touch on a little bit is your story. There must be a reason that you've decided to take on this field. And so tell us about that. Was there an event? Was there something that caused you to really pique your interest and get involved in what you're doing?
Yes, actually, just kind of through my life history here, I'll just kind of make it brief, but having a severe childhood traumas growing up with, violence and domestic violence and divorce and parents with substance abuse and things like that, which is just all too common, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Just led to me kind of being a troublemaker in my teenage years. And eventually I joined the Marine Corps. And then after that, I really wanted to bring some stability in my life. So I started doing things like fitness and personal training. Then I became a chiropractor and started studying really the aspects of nutrition and how it related to disease. And my wife and I had a functional medicine clinic where we ran more advanced testing and we helped people with nutritional lifestyle changes, mindfulness exercises, and all for the focus of reversing chronic illnesses. And what we found was around 75-80% of people would unintentionally sabotage their results after going through all these steps shortly after our care. And so I started talking with different colleagues and different mentors and other professionals that did my line of work, and they found that was the norm. They said, yeah, that's just what happens. And this was kind of troublesome to me. So I started exploring it deeper, and what I found was, in looking for the answers here, I learned a great deal about myself, a great deal about my own, some of the things that had happened in my own life and why they happened. So I started exploring memories and what happens with our thoughts and what trauma is essentially, and really diving into the non-physical part of our minds. And that's where we discovered that about 98% of our clients today, all the reason for whatever it is, whether it's cancer, chronic pain, digestive illnesses, whatever, about 98% of all of those conditions relate to something that happened in the ages of 0 to 6 years old.
Yeah. And this is a common theme, I think, for male and females. But the similarity to what you're describing is something I've heard a lot in men's group. That early trauma that happened to them really affects them throughout their life. So I kind of want to circle back to that if we can. Now, you mentioned joining the Marines. Were you aware of, I guess, the need to maybe have a little bit more discipline in your life at that stage? Were you searching as a teenager at that point to find a way to try to deal with the trauma that had gone on in your life and saw the Marines maybe as a potential way out?
Very much so. At the point whenever I joined the Marines, I was hanging out with the worst of the worst crowd. I was doing a lot of drugs,
Hmm.
hard drugs, and I basically wanted a clean slate. And I knew that, and now I know why, but I knew at the time
Yeah.
that I wasn't capable of getting away from those peers on my own. So the only way to really do that was something radical. And so, secondary reason is because I never knew my father growing up, so
Mm.
I wanted some kind of just some kind of resource that would put me in the right direction. And I went there and I basically told them, hey, it's time for me to have my butt kicked. And they were like, well, we can do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so in doing so, it did align me with great leaders, people that were very sharp. It allowed parts of me to become razor sharp and using my mind correctly and getting that clean slate I wanted. On the other hand, the emotional pain that was already there, that
Yeah.
was under the surface, that I had no idea was even what I would call our dominant thoughts. Today, when I discuss things with people and when clients contact me from all around the world, one of the things I tell them is your beliefs are not what you think they are. You're
Yeah.
really you're because you have two sets. You have a set that you know about that you're consciously aware of. They're the ones that you're thinking right now. And then there's another set of beliefs that are mathematically 99.994%. And those are stored in your body that don't use any kind of words, don't use a language, but they're stored in your body and they're always running on an endless loop. And they basically are a collaboration of what was there first and more accumulations of your environmental exposure. So if you were 0 to 6, you were exposed to a lot of violence, a lot of trauma. You basically have these magnets linked for that. And as you go through life, every time you come across that, it just adds more links to it. So in the Marines, the time in the Marines basically added several more links to this. And but at the same time, it did give me um, a razor sharp edge. I got out of the Marines. I was sober. I had a much better. Um, I'm not going to say healthy, but I was much more driven to do better habits. I was working out at the time. I was into fitness and nutrition and things like that. I even
You didn't
started
have much of a choice, did you?
well, I'll tell you what. There's always a choice because when I went to the Marines,
Ah,
interesting enough, I had all kinds of like you could say drug habits, right?
yeah.
And I had to clean up in order to go through the processing system, boot camp, and all those things. But the minute I hit the fleet that day, I was exposed to Marines doing drugs, and immediately, and when you're given that situation, you have a choice. And my mind was already made up. It's like my identity had already shifted. And identity is something I'd like to visit today too, because that's
Sure.
what makes a big difference in us. My identity had already taken on that, hey, this is what I was going to do, no matter what, nothing's stopping me. And I didn't come here to be associated with that. So although I ran into that the first day in the fleet, it was easy for me to turn down. And I started doing things that I wasn't used to. I looked for people that took things more serious, that were into getting fitness and actually becoming more and more elite Marines and doing things that
Yeah.
your typical Marines weren't doing.
You bring up a really fascinating test that hit you right away when you joined the Marines. And a lot of men are faced with tests every day, but you were in a situation where if you were clean, hadn't been clean for very long, and boom, this test shows up. And right out of the gate, you've made a conscious decision to just move on. What was the trigger that really said, no way, man, I am not going down that. I'm done. I'm done. Like, what makes you walk away when you could have gone backwards?
I think that has to do with our identity. And what I've noticed about myself is um, I'm pretty strong willed when it comes to that. Now, I'm not going to say willpower
Mm,
because willpower does not get it done. Um, there's been times in our life when we unconsciously are not even aware of the process going on, but we shift identities. I would say for men listening, probably the biggest one that you could really relate to right now is if you became a father. The day, see, one day you're hanging out with the guys and you're used to being on your own, used to
Yeah.
doing your own things. And then you meet a woman and you become a father. And for many men, there's an identity shift because now it's not just about hanging out with the guys, it's being a role model. That's one example of just kind of having an identity shift. And the identity is the fundamental core of who we are. Now, that's one example of just taking on something, a new identity shift. And the work I do in holographic manipulation therapy, I visit this concept constantly with my patients, because in order for them to heal from these autoimmune conditions and chronic pain and whatever else, I tell them right off the bat, you have to change identities. And so that's why most of the 98% of the time when I use regressive techniques, okay, not hypnosis, but something more specific. And we go right back to the source of that, and we find something that happens 0 to 6. We change it, and their identity is shifted to now a person that doesn't match that illness anymore. It's not, there's an emotional need not met. And if we go back to that early experience, meet that emotion, then the rest of their identity, the rest of who they are, the rest of the way they identify with themselves, the way they believe about themselves, all at the unconscious level shifts to where they get better. So the reason I did that is because I had already fully taken on the identity of a Marine, even though I was still green as green gets. And in doing so, my identity had shifted so much that it wasn't even on the radar. Now, for a person going through similar experiences, let's say that they are in a place where they're exposed to lots of substance abuse and having a lot of hard times, and they decide, hey, I want to go to the Army, or I want to go to the Marines, I just want to do something. If they haven't made that deep decision in their identity and they join the Marines and they're looking for that to change them without making the change shift inside of themselves, that's when they can be much more prone to falling into those temptations.
Sure. The whole idea around identity, I think, is really interesting. Commonly in a lot of the men's groups I'm a part of, we'll talk about, guys wearing a mask and not keeping it real. And I think what we're really talking about here is an identity. They've taken on something that they're not for whatever reason. And most of the time, what I found is there's some kind of wound, usually at the age where you're talking about, that they have not dealt with. And then it becomes these unanswered questions that men bury deep down in their soul that they hope they never have to deal with, because that would require them to look in the mirror, right? So the question is, as we get into more of what you do, how do you help men deal with the baggage that they've been carrying around so that they can begin to move forward? Because obviously you can't move forward until you deal with the baggage. So how do you help begin to heal from those wounds for some people?
Well, first off, it's important to recognize that your memories aren't you. So if you're gonna describe baggage and things like that, people are under the impression that the memories that's happened to them are them, and that basically creates an identity. But that identity oftentimes is destructive to either their health or their goals or their dreams and desires, because there's something that doesn't match. So say a man decides, hey, I want to do this and I want to be successful, but at the same time he has voices inside of his head and he has feelings inside of his body that tell him, no, you can't do that, you're not worth it, it'll never work, you don't deserve it. It's very important to realize that those aren't you. Those are things that you learned. And if you can, if you have the let's say the consistency and the appetite for going after your dream and not listening to those, eventually those voices will fade out. And what will happen is something new will start to emerge. But in order to get there, you have to realize that the unconscious mind, okay, which is again mathematically 99.994%, is basically a series of recordings that have happened when you're 0 to 6. Why I say 0 to 6? Because it's important to realize by the time a person is 7 years old, they've already learned half of what they'll know their entire life. Half. So whenever a person decides they get older, especially a man, and they decide, hey, I want to go after this, or I want to do this, I want to achieve something great, I want to do great things for my family, and I want to have a great income and do something that I feel powered about. The minute they start having those feelings deep down of that, not, like they can't deserve it, they don't, it's not going to work, you don't deserve it, it's not going to work for anyone, it's not going to work for you. It's important to really start getting away from environmental influences that are going to keep that going. It's important to start taking a little time and spending time with people that are only going to help you proliferate those dreams. For one, that's a type of conditioning that can help you environmentally take on that new identity. Because if you're hanging around with the same crowd, that are having the same feelings that they have within them, and you have a new desire, it's going to, neurologically, we're wired for a few things. One of those things is we're wired to resist anything that doesn't match our identity. So if you're one of these men that decides, man, I want to do something great, first off, realize that if it doesn't match your identity, there's going to be resistance.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's impossible. That doesn't mean you can't do it. All people that are great figures have felt that resistance and pursued through it. So that's the first thing, is realize there's going to be resistance because it doesn't match your identity. You take on a new identity, okay? But you also have to realize you're going to find resistance in how you feel others are going to feel about you. And you're going to find resistance in what you believe to be true. So the thing is, find environmental influences that are going to help you accept new truths that will help you start to form this identity that you want, and be picky about your identity. Be picky about your environmental influences that will not support that. Now, if you can do those things, you can achieve anything you want.
Yeah.
Those are the biggest roadblocks to resistance. And that's for people with chronic illness. That's for people that have a poverty mindset and they want to become, financially independent or wealthy. Same kind of resistance. And that's the same kind of resistance that I face when people are trying to heal from chronic illnesses. Because oftentimes you can have a person with diabetes type 2 change their diet, start exercising, start walking, doing something enjoyable, and on paper, their blood sugar improves. Within 6 months, they'll have diabetes again. Why? Because they were doing something outside of those areas of resistance, and they'll go back to eating the snacks, and they'll go back to sitting on the couch and doing things because that's what was there first. So,
and I'm just speaking for me personally. Consistency, call it discipline, those are huge challenges. And I think a lot of people face that. So how can we stay more, we're at the beginning of the year here. And so a lot of people think that just by buying a gym membership, that's an automatic 10-pound loss. No, not so much. You got to do the work. So, and maybe I'm wrong, but short of consistency, it does require a little discipline because it requires a little work. So how do we stay more? What's one way that you encourage people to stay more disciplined, more consistent, so that they can begin to achieve their goals?
What I would do is make sure that they have, similar to what we were just talking about, because if, like you said, buying a gym membership doesn't guarantee a 10-pound weight loss. Now, it could initially, and that's why you'll talk to people, if you ever talk to men who are in the fitness industry themselves, I will guarantee you that they can immediately recognize their own clients' limitations to being able to keep weight off. They come in, they lose a few pounds, and next thing you know, within 6 months they gain it back. It's the same
Yeah.
thing that doesn't match their identity. And I will say, if it's weight over 50 pounds, it's usually body armor. It's usually they've have some kind of emotional pain that weight is kind of satisfying. Um, but it's all the same mechanism. What you want to do is, if you're the discipline comes in choosing new friends, choosing new environmental influences, because if you have the right context, the right surroundings, they're going to give you the right encouragement when that encouragement is needed to stay on track. So the first thing is, become clear in your goals. Become very clear in your goals. If you join a gym membership, what is it you want?
Yep.
If you want to lose 10 pounds, is that all you want, or do you want to change the shape of your body as well? And if that's the case, write that down on some paper. Write that down on some paper somewhere. And then every morning when you wake up, visualize with emotions. Don't just write blank stuff on paper, because words only correspond to the most superficial layer of the brain. And that part of your brain is what I teach my doctors. I operate a school now. My wife and I operate a school where we teach doctors and professionals holographic manipulation therapy to resolve trauma. And what I teach my doctors and therapists is that when people come to you for issues, they're lying. Not on purpose. Not on purpose, but they're operating from that conscious part of ourself that is the voice in your head. And it's also the least informed and the last to know anything. So by the time you have a voice or a thought in your head, it's already been skewed and ran through different apertures that create a story that sounds rationalizing to you and convincing to you, but it has nothing based on truth. So if you're writing just something blank on paper, or writing words on paper, you're not going to stimulate the deeper areas of your mind. That's where the tasks really get done. Your conscious mind is not going to be what gets it done. You have to engage your unconscious mind. So how do you do that? Write on paper. See yourself visually being that person every day. When you wake up in the morning, when you go to bed at night, look at that person who's 10 pounds lighter, who's wearing different clothes, who has the esteem, the self-esteem, the improvements you would feel. Maybe if you're doing it for health issues, picture your health getting better, and reject any notion that it's not going to work. Reject any idea that comes in your head that this isn't going to work. Your doctor said you can't do this. Well, I'm supposed to go see Gary on Saturday for the game, and I really should be working out. You've got to reject any idea that conflicts with that. Otherwise, it's just a matter of time before you're going to default to the old programming. You're going to default to the old patterns that have got you to where you are. But if you can get your mind involved and visually see it every day, and start to change the context in your surroundings. In other words, the people you associate with, and the TV programs you watch, all of those things. That's exactly how you start transforming your mind slowly from the inside out. But you want to recognize that your unconscious mind is like a train on tracks. And that's why people can lose weight, but they gain it back. That's why people can have autoimmune conditions and they get it reversed, but they sabotage the results. That's why a diabetic can reverse his blood sugar and improve it. So he's basically cured of his diabetes, but in 6 months, a year, he has it again. Why? It's because your unconscious mind, the one that's driving all of your behaviors, is like a train on tracks. And understand the process of making that train jump to a different set of tracks is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And if you can, that's where the discipline and the choice of habits and visualizing yourself every day, changing that so get ready to be uncomfortable and be willing to go through it. I certainly was whenever I turned into that, when I changed that identity going into the Marines. Okay. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. It's just a matter of knowing when it's uncomfortable. That's when you just need to recognize, it's uncomfortable because I'm on this set of tracks, and that's all my mind knows.
Sure.
So,
What's interesting, you said a couple of things, and it kind of leads me down this road here. I would describe it as a different kind of trauma. Quite honestly, the last couple of years have been incredibly difficult. There's been, such a variety of things, from COVID to political unrest, and there's just a lot of junk on TV, in the newspapers. I mean, it's, online, and it's everywhere, and it's really led to a lot of trauma for people. They've experienced death. They maybe, last year at this time, I was flat on my back, sick as a dog with COVID. I thought I'd get nothing more than a cough, and it really knocked me down pretty good. But we've really gone through a couple of years of trauma. I don't know what other way to say it. How do we overcome all of this? There's just been so much, and you've talked a lot about environment, so I know that plays a big deal in it. But how do we turn away from some of this stuff and still be informed, but still, be in the right state of mind, the right frame of mind that we need to be in order to live? If that makes any sense.
Well, I think that you're right. There's been a significant amount of trauma and a lot of fear, a lot of things, that play on the deepest part of our brain centers. And what we know today from what I'll say is quantum physics is the most valid of all sciences today. It's the one that really makes sense for the way things are. It's the one that's continually being validated as more and more research goes into it. And essentially what this is showing us that we are the creator of our life. Everything we have, everything we do is something we've created. And for some people, that's kind of hard to swallow. For others, it's very empowering. I would say that first off, you want to really be weary of where you're spending your time, because that unconscious mind, okay, it basically controls the vibration of your body. So if we look at atoms are, spinning and vibrating, and we live in a vibrational world.
Yep.
And whatever is our deepest running dialogue within ourself is ultimately going to draw on similar experiences to that. So we really need to really, the fastest way to start solving this is for people to start connecting again. People start to, get away from their TVs and get outside. People start to, because that's one thing we've definitely lost. And I will say that the evidence for loneliness is very, very, very significant.
Yeah.
How devastating that is. And people right now are in such a state of fear that there's no connection. There's a lot of disruption even between families. And this has a major impact on our health. In fact, being lonely and being unconnected from people, no, it should be the right type of people. You don't want to just go.
Right.
You don't want to just go indulge yourself into some environment where you don't fit, you don't feel right, because that's even more harmful. You want to be around people that you can express yourself in the way that you want to express yourself. Actually, there's been some interesting studies just to show you how important expressing yourself is. If they look at breast cancer in women that are depressed and in unhealthy marriages, they looked at like 75,000 women, okay, and the women that are depressed in unhealthy marriages that express themselves don't seem to have cancer. Then they looked at women who aren't depressed and they have unhealthy marriages and they don't have cancer. Then they looked at women who are depressed don't express themselves in unhealthy marriages, and they have 9 times
Oh, wow.
more chances of breast cancer than the other groups. And this really questioned researchers. What it shows is if you don't express who you are, if you're around people and you're constantly trying to bite your tongue to fit in with the crowd, that has an enormous toll on you. So you need to be around people that are like-minded, that you can be yourself with. That being said, loneliness is worse than smoking 16 cigarettes a day.
In fact, I'm glad you brought this topic up. We've talked about it on the show. We've talked about the things that come out of loneliness, such as divorce and sexual addiction and alcoholism and those types
Right.
of things. And I'm reading a lot of new studies and seeing a lot of statistics on men and loneliness right now, because women are really good. Women are really good about being in community. Men, not so much. And so I'm a strong encourager of men finding, small groups, whether it's in their church or outside their church. There's just tons of groups like that where they can be around other men or dads, so that they can learn and express themselves like you're talking about, because men in loneliness is really a substantial problem that doesn't get talked about a whole lot.
No, it's again, one of those silent things that's not even recognized or screened for. And they're starting to have some interesting data that shows it's devastating. If just the amount of data that's coming in continually pointing at just um, how effective being in small groups where you feel belonging really substantiates your health in a number of areas. This has been one of the biggest correlators with what are called the blue zones. I'm sure you've heard of areas around the world where people live to be well over 100 years old. Isolated areas. There's a couple areas in U.S., Okinawa, Italy, places that are isolated to where that group of population lives to be well over 100 years old. Uh, there was a place I shared some information on a while back in the Hansa area, and strikingly, this was outside of Russia. Um, a doctor with a PhD in nutrition actually went there, and he found these people that were 120, 135,
Wow.
145 years old, active in fields working at 120. He followed these people around. They drank alcohol. They had never heard of a calorie. They ate all the food on the table. They drank a high amount of vodka. They drank wine tumblers every day. He followed a woman around who was 135 years old. She smoked all the time. He said, "How many cigarettes do you smoke a day?" She said, 2 packs a day. And it astonished him. And he found that the missing ingredient in these people is they all belonged. They all were part of a community,
Yeah.
and they had no grudges, no peeves, no quarrels. And these people were you know doing remarkably well. Take that into consideration, and those kind of communities also learn how to, at a very early age, release those emotions. They will learn how to express themselves to where they can be their authentic self. Where here in America, we're not taught to do that. We're taught to repress your feelings, and
Yeah.
that's oftentimes why you
Especially as men.
right, especially as
Yeah.
men.
Yeah.
That's why you see many times geriatric men that are pulling up in cars and they're trying to get out. Their back pain hurts. And they're
Yeah.
hurting on the way into a store. Those men are remembering things they should have forgot 50 years ago.
Mm.
Grudges, peeves, things like that. And the body is nothing more than a physical representation of the mind. And that's my area of specialty is psychosomatic medicine. And what I can tell you right now is there's been 3,500 published peer-reviewed journals of people having miraculous healings, orange-sized tumors, everything you could think of just disappearing with no treatment because their identity shifted. That I did back to that identity. But whenever we have, you know, when we have these things that we've remembered that we should have forgotten long ago, grudges, peeves, and things like that,
Yeah.
it's going to really impede on our health. And it's not just the men, it's the culture that hasn't allowed us to express ourselves in a healthy way. And when we don't express ourselves, um, our body starts to kind of, manifest these different, these challenges, these issues.
Yeah. It's interesting because when COVID first occurred, the small group that I was a part of, it spun our heads off because we were in community, we were doing life together. We've made a conscious decision to not be alone, to have a wingman, all that kind of stuff. And when it occurred, and all of a sudden you're asked to shelter in place,
Right.
and wear a mask, it really spun us for a while. We're like, now wait a second, we've been telling each other not to do this, and I understand that there's medical aspects to this, but stay tuned because there's going to be more about this, because I really want to help in this movement, actually. And we'll be talking more about this down the road when we establish some comeback communities. Maybe we'll spin our True Man group into other communities, but I'm just a big avid supporter of this, that men find a place to be in community so that we can live longer and healthier lives. And speaking of environment, and I'm sure you would agree, is that we have so much to give each other and learn from each other. We're just better in group. Being a lone ranger, it just doesn't work that well. I've tried it. I'm sure you've tried it.
Right.
And boom, you landed in the Marines, probably. Right. So, I'm just an avid supporter of this, and I'm worried when I look at the mental health statistics right now coming out all the way around, whether it's male or female, but the men's statistics that I think that are starting to come out of this are, well, they're just not good. So,
yeah.
So as we begin to wrap up here, Dr. Gabe, what's if there's one thing we haven't touched on today that you'd want to leave us with for the men that might be listening out there, what's something that you would give them as kind of a going away nugget here?
Earlier I mentioned our mind, our conscious mind is the lying rational mind that makes up stories and rationales. I would say one of the most helpful things that I've seen with, and don't get me wrong, the majority of my clients that come to me are women. Women have 80% of the autoimmune conditions today. But for men, I would say one of the most helpful things to understand is our emotions. Okay. And really, one thing that you want to realize, this is fairly new information that's not really, it's certainly not talked about with psychologists and experts in men's health and all that. But whenever you have an emotional shift in your body, men have anger or maybe even sadness or rage or whatever it might be, some kind of emotional shift takes place.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you don't even have any kind of warning or consent or permission. It doesn't even, it just comes on without even you being aware of it. And oftentimes you might even, there's no trigger to it. Okay. But it could even be road rage. Okay. So
here's a good one.
That's something that men have more than women, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
What you want to really realize is that if you really can think to those times when an emotion comes up and you feel it coming in your body, and within 20 seconds you're in that mode of anger or rage or sadness, whatever it be, remember this: when you have an emotional shift like that, that emotion takes on like a life form. It becomes similar to a life form inside of your body, and like any life form, it's going to do anything it can to stay alive. So it's going to shift what you pay attention to immediately without you being aware of it, without your permission. It's going to shift what you pay attention to re-trigger that emotion.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example of this. We can all relate to this as guys. Have you ever had a long drawn out argument with someone? Long drawn out argument where you just hash everything out?
Namely your wife.
Yeah. Wife. I mean, it
Yeah.
could be wife, it could be girlfriend, it could be
Right.
you name
Right.
it, right?
Yeah.
But you have this long drawn out, and if you can get this, it'll really help you apart. It'll really help you. Okay. In everything, professional and personal life. But let's say you have a long drawn out argument with maybe a coworker, a wife, a girlfriend, someone, or even you're ticked off at your boss about something. When that emotion comes alive inside of you, really understand, consciously understand that that emotion now is taken on a life force, and it's going to skew what you pay attention to. It's going to alter what you're paying attention to in your environment immediately. And it's going to try to re-trigger that emotion. So let's say you have a long drawn out argument with a girlfriend, and you sit there and you apologize afterwards. You're like, okay, I'm sorry. And she's saying, I'm sorry too. And you're trying to rekindle things. You'll notice within a very short period of time of trying to rekindle things that everything she does just tends to set you off. And the same goes with her. Why? Because your mind is searching for things in the environment to keep that emotion alive without your permission.
Ooh.
And if you can consciously become aware of that, so let's say she upsets you and you're upset and everything else, and you say, okay, enough's enough. I'm sorry, hon. And she's apologizing and everything's cool. Know right then that your mind's lying to you. Look at things like maybe she leaves, something. Maybe she comes in and sets her shoes a certain spot. Maybe she comes in and throws her jacket a certain area. This usually doesn't happen to men. Maybe she leans on your car a certain way, leans on your car that you love. And those kind of things have never really set you off. You haven't really noticed it before. But when she's doing that right now, you're like, oh, don't do that. It's your mind lying to you, trying to keep that emotion alive. And if you can consciously become aware of that and tell yourself, my mind just lying to me, it's trying to keep that anger alive. It's trying to keep that rage alive. You'll see and feel that rage, that emotional state start to dissipate. It's like a fire just going out. And it's very liberating to realize that. That's the fundamental mechanisms behind lots of grudges and lots of, why many people don't talk to each other anymore is because, well, they set me off a long time ago. And that emotion is what's driving your behaviors.
Yeah.
And oftentimes oftentimes it's lying to you. But if you can realize your emotions take on life forms, and like any life form, they're going to do everything they can to stay alive, including alter your perception of what you see in your environment. It's liberating to realize that, and it's liberating to take back that power, because you'll catch on. That's just something she always does, but it's only ticking me off right now because it's trying to keep that anger alive. You'll be in much more control of your behavior, of your physiology, because let's face it, the statistics are not bad, are not good for men. If you have a fit of rage, you're looking at a 65% increase in having a stroke or heart attack if you hold on to that. So
that is incredible, helpful advice. I was listening very diligently to it. I'm very big on trying to pause. That's something I've had to put into place and make diligent effort of. And I can only say I'm improving. I am a work in progress, but I think that was a very helpful tip. Dr. Gabe, before we leave, and I'm going to put this information in the show notes as I always do, how can people get a hold of you if they want to contact you and learn more? How can they get a hold of you?
Well, I'm big on Facebook, so I share a lot of information, a lot of content, talking about things like this and many others. So Gabe Roberts is my personal page, Dr. Gabe Roberts professional page on Facebook. If they want to contact me directly, the best way is an email, and that's info at elevateyourfield.com. Just elevate YOUR field.com.
Cool. Again, we'll put those in the show notes. Man, really appreciate it. This is great conversation. Appreciating you having being on the show today, Dr. Gabe, and maybe we'll have you back in the future.
Awesome, Mike. I'd like that.
All right. Take care.